I set my soul on fire.
So I know what you're thinking, right? You wanted the Kendrick review. I know. Believe me, it's coming. I'm working on it, all right? However, this is an album that I had been waiting for a little while now. It's your boy, Raymond here, and today we're going to be talking about the new Smile album, which is a band composed of Tom Skinner, Jonny Greenwood, and Thom Yorke. As most of you probably already know, if you've been watching this channel for a little while, I'm a huge Radiohead fan, and I have been waiting for a new Radiohead album since Moonshaped Pool, to be honest with you. I guess this is probably the closest that we're going to get. How this trio came about, I honestly don't really know. I think Tom said in one of the interviews about a month ago that they were jamming out together at some point in the studio with Jonny, and I guess they just decided to do a couple tracks and see what happened, just messing around, and I guess they had finally decided that they wanted to take it in a direction of possibly doing an album together, and here we are. This album is, of course, called A Light for Attracting Attention. A very interesting title, and I feel like with the themes that are discussed, that Tom discusses on this album lyrically, as well as the sonic qualities of it, I feel like the title is very appropriate. A lot of the sonic qualities on this album are just so gorgeous, but also haunting at the same time, very reminiscent of a Radiohead album, and rather reminiscent actually of a little bit older Radiohead. I would say, this album really stems a lot from the sounds coming off of In Rainbows, as well as Moonshaped Pool, I guess a little bit. Probably a little bit also of OK Computer as well, I would say. Very groovy, but also very, very orchestrated instrumentals. Obviously, you have Jonny Greenwood doing the orchestral arrangements and everything like that, like he's been doing. And then you have Tom singing, of course, while also doing guitar. Tom Skinner's drumming is just absolutely perfect. I love it so much. I think I like it, honestly, a little bit more than Philip Selway's. I'm sorry. I know some of the Radiohead fans are going to be pissed about that. I think I do enjoy his drumming just a little bit more. He just is able to find this pocket in the groove that I think Philip wasn't really, not that he wasn't able to do, but I think he just, exposes the pocket and is able to find a groove just a lot more fluidly and a lot more in like an interesting way. It could be the mixing on this project, because the drums and the bass are just so prevalent on this whole album. Personally, that's just what it sounds like for me. Obviously, if it's going to be, if you're going to have Thom Yorke on the lyrics and as well as the singing, then you're obviously going to be hearing some social and political commentary stuff. Obviously, you have like the first single, which is You Will Never Work in Television Again. Tom said in an interview like a little while ago that it was actually a very straightforward track, and it was a reference essentially to the Harvey Weinstein thing, basically, which is no surprise, honestly, that they would tackle subject matter like that. Obviously, it's Thom Yorke. That was essentially our first little taste of what we would get for this album. Then it was The Smoke, then it was, I believe it was Skirting on the Surface, I want to say, and then we got like Panavision. I guess like the only thing that I would have preferred that they did was, I would just wish they wouldn't have released so many singles leading up to this album release. They essentially released like half of the tracks beforehand. There was like 5 or 6 singles that came out beforehand. That I feel like had the potential to sort of ruin the authenticity of the album, I guess, just like a little bit, just because it felt like most of it had already been out, and I already kind of got an idea of what the sound of the record was going to be like. Even the album cuts here, I feel like, just add so much more as well to the singles that we got. There's a couple of the album cuts that I think are actually my favorite off this album, and those are, of course, being Thin Thing and A Hairdryer. I think the groove on Thin Thing is, I think, probably my favorite off the album. The way that Jonny and Tom Skinner, of course, the way that Jonny and Tom are able to fluctuate with Jonny's, guitar picking, his very rhythmic and very light flourishes of guitar picking with Tom's drumming and just in this really thick pocket. And then we've got these bass grooves as well that come in that just complement it even more. And then Tom just sort of floating on top with these very echoey, very haunting vocals as per usual. It just goes through so many different passages, it feels like, and the song feels like it goes on for like much longer than it actually does. It's just so interesting, and it just gets you really in the headspace of that groove. I could listen to it like so many different times. It feels like a whole experience in one track. Tom's lyrics here, of course, sort of invoke, I guess, his perspective of like a being or like a woman, essentially, that is sort of like manipulative, abusive, essentially, like thin thing, you know, sort of like a woman. But I think it maybe dives a little bit deeper than that. I think he's probably talking about an entity, not just like a relationship that he might have had previously. So yeah, the lyrics are super interesting. Like, first she'll pull your fingers off, and then she'll pull your toes, making mushrooms out of men, to a face of solid gold. You know, just a lot of these really interesting metaphors, and a lot of these like visual phrases that Tom always, of course, likes to throw in, just to add to the element and to the atmosphere of the track. And it's just really gorgeous and really interesting to listen to, as is, I mean, pretty much anything that Radiohead does as well. And the other one too, A Hairdryer, which I found was interesting. The drums and the bass groove are just so like thick and are just so rapid on this. It has this momentum to it that I think some of the other tracks don't necessarily have. A lot of the tracks on this album are very groovy, but A Hairdryer has this sort of pushing forward momentum that isn't so much of like a backbeat, but it's like very rapid, very moving forward. Tom usually tends to write these songs from like the perspective of him, a little bit more reflective this time, whereas on some of the previous Radiohead material, he tends to write almost as like this giant metaphorical thesis, basically, and it's not necessarily coming from like a personal emotional perspective. It's more coming from like these very grand world and universal views and like these very philosophical points of view that he has on the world. Whereas these feel a little bit more personal to him, especially. A lot of the things that he's talking about here, which are very similar in terms of the stuff that he discusses on a lot of the Radiohead projects, this just feels a little bit more intimate, and I guess would be the best word to describe it. Feels like you're really there with them in the studio, and it feels like you're essentially sitting with Tom as he's reading you these passages and as he's singing to you. With these very echoey vocals going on throughout like the entire project. It's just a gorgeous record, honestly. I wasn't expecting anything less, but I'm glad they at least met that expectation and some. Every song here is just gorgeous. I would say some of my favorites would be like Thin Thing, You Will Never Work in Television Again, The Smoke, Skirting on the Surface, which I think is just a beautiful closer. I think it wraps up the project really nicely, and as well as The Same, which is a really dark and almost haunting opener to this project, but I think it just works incredibly well in the context of everything that is being presented sonically on this album. You essentially have like almost no drums for the first opener, and then you just get these sweeping passages of synthesizers, Johnny's amazing orchestration as well, which comes in, and then Tom's echoing vocals. It just all mixes, and it really puts you sonically into the headspace of what this album is going to sound like. And then you get the opposite straight after that, which is just the driving force that, you know, sets up this album for the grooves and for the fun of each of the instrumentals that are presented. Yeah, honestly, I could go on forever about how great this album sounds and about how amazing a lot of Tom's vocals are and everything like that. I think this might be possibly one of my favorite albums, if not my favorite album of the year so far. So yeah, so I think for The Smile, for A Light for Attracting Attention, I think for this album, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. So yeah, I think it's an incredible album. I think you guys should definitely give it a listen. Obviously, if you're watching this video, you must be a big Radiohead fan, or you must be curious enough to know what The Smile is about. Highly, highly recommend you go check it out. I think it's fantastic, and I think it's a really fun and a really beautiful listen that is very emotional and very intimate and very groovy as well. Something to really jam to some of these instrumentals. But yeah, that is my thoughts and review on The Smile, A Light for Attracting Attention. Let me know in the comments what your guys' thoughts on this album would be. I promise you the Kendrick album is coming soon, probably tomorrow or probably Monday or Tuesday, I would say. But yeah, I just had to get this out of there because, like I said, I mean, the singles came out for the most part like way before this album was actually released, so I pretty much heard most of it by the time it came out. So I was just ready to give my thoughts on it right away, so that's why I'm giving you guys this now, but I just wanted to sit with it and make sure that it really stuck with me over time, which it did. So yeah, I highly recommend that you guys go ahead and check it out. I appreciate you guys for watching. If you guys have any thoughts or opinions on the album that maybe I didn't cover, or any insights about something that maybe Tom mentioned in the lyrics or anything like that, be sure to drop it in the comments down below. Like and subscribe, of course, for more videos coming up, especially the Kendrick review that is also coming up. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have for you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.